Tara Brown and the Swinging London Colour Revolution by Vic Chanham, Chapter 3. In the summer of 1958, my brother Gareth and I drove around the island with a portable tape recorder in the boot, recording local Irish music. It was a great experience going from pub to pub to hear people sing, as is the custom in our country, and then asking them if they could repeat their singing in private, or perhaps they knew some musicians who could help provide a full performance for us to record. This way, we would spend between 2 and 4 days in every town and then move on. We are like the composers from 1900, I told my brother. They also went out into the countryside to find old melodies they could take up in their compositions. People like Dvorak, Sibelius, Bartók, Strauss. They often went on foot and used a flute and a pencil. We do it with modern technique. Deacon told me that story. Of course he did, said my brother. We were both very much in love with our own country. As wonderful as Venice and the Côte d'Azur were, Ireland was Europe's true beauty. No place I had seen could beat her, and Gareth thought exactly the same. I was a proud Irish boy. When shortly after Gareth started his own record company with a partner, I happily became shareholder. We did well. We helped make Irish music likable for many people. We gave some musicians a career. Nothing of that was my doing, but I was closely related and interested, so I used to say we. For a while, my favorite guest at Lugala, and a regular one, was the poet, novelist and playwright Brendan Behan. He was from a nationalist family and had been active in the IRA, the armed organization that was established to bring Irish independence closer by way of violence. This has resulted in 2 jail terms, which he used to hone his writing skills. Brendan was a great drinker who could be vile to other guests when he'd had too much, but to me he was always sweet and helpful. One evening he even raised his fists against a philosopher of sorts who broke a golden Lugala house rule by suggesting I should smoke and drink less. I was 13 at the time and never drank more than 4 glasses a day and smoked less than a pack. Especially my smoking was not considered excessive in those days. People just lit up whenever they felt their favorite film star would have done the same. The philosopher was never seen again, and Brendan went on to have a lot of success with both a play and a novel that year. As Gareth had foreseen, I started driving at 14. Though still a tad short to comfortably sit behind the wheel, I managed by pushing the driver's seat back and putting my buttocks against its front edge. Half standing and grasping the wheel firmly with both hands so as not to fall backwards, I drove Gareth's car around Lugala and then, now with an old cushion sustaining my back, onto the local roads. Not so fast, Gareth, who had insisted on accompanying me, exclaimed. Get the hang of it first, will you? I already have, I answered, and it was true. During those first rounds over Lugala's lane, I felt I could ride this machine in the way I had dreamt up long ago, with Gareth on the road or in the rolls to school. I knew instantly I was made for this and didn't consider my driving dangerous in any way. I was simply going as fast as circumstances allowed. The roads I couldn't change. They seldom allowed for full speed, but I quickly got better at coming close. Just when everything seemed to be hunky-dory at Lugala, with Deacon being more of a friend than a teacher and the days at St. Stephen's well and truly forgotten, fresh disaster struck. From one of her trips to New York, Mummy Darling brought home a new housemate, Miguel, a short and not particularly handsome Cuban fella she had met in his fashion boutique in the Big Apple, or something of the kind. I couldn't be bothered to listen to the story in detail, especially not when it became clear that Mummy and Miguel were spending a lot of their time in bed, and Miguel had been promoted to the position of lover, with the possibility of one day becoming her husband very much on the table. The idea of Miguel being our stepfather especially repulsed Gareth, who wasn't in the least inclined to hide his disgust for what he considered to be a loafer and a scrounger whose only quality concerned what he carried with him in his pants. I couldn't care less what Mummy and Miguel were doing, as long as I was able to stay away from him. Christmas 1959 started the celebrations to wave goodbye to the 1950s and welcome in the 1960s, which were going to take the whole week in between. Lugala was filling up with people who were definitely not leaving before the 1st of January. Those who were lonely enough to be in need of company showed up during the daytime hours of the 24th, with notorious latecomers greeted in the wee hours by an already boisterous circle, while those with family dinners to attend were trickling in over the course of those weird empty days between Christmas and New Year's Eve, which were best filled with banter, drink and dance, in the words of Mummy Darling. One of the latest arrivals on the 31st itself was a polite and dominant male in his 40s, with the moustache and eyebrows that accentuated his personality, who had been visiting us a number of times over the past year, and who was commonly known as Sir John. Whether this form of address was mere reverence or referring to an actual title, I didn't know. Nobody seemed clear about it, as Sir John preferred talking about philosophy and social change over his private affairs. I liked Sir John. He never got drunk or lost his cool, as most of the other visitors would at some point. However fine an evening started off, there always came a moment when this one well-known highly praised artist managed to insult this other well-known highly praised artist, and a duel of painfully sharp words would ensue. Highly entertaining for sure, but also somewhat scary when it involved two well-built adults who had completely forgotten where they were and what the reason for their presence was, blind to anything but their hurting pride. With Sir John, one would never expect such behavior. When he, still in the early hours of the decade's final evening, addressed me directly asking, "Well, young man, what's your idea of the 60s?" I had no reason to suspect any hidden motive behind this question, and therefore answered in all honesty, concentrating on finding the right words as people were listening in, some of whom had every cause to fear the changes that a new era might bring. So I replied, "I'm almost 15 at the start of the decade, and I will be close to 25 when it ends. So the 1960s are definitely going to be my period, sir." "Very well," he smiled, while others were laughing off their accumulated anxieties. He then went on with the conversation he had been engaged in, and I continued on my way to the kitchen, where I knew a bottle of white wine I was going to capture for me and my mates. The next morning, Sir John and I found ourselves among the few early risers who were having breakfast before noon, and on his instigation I invited him to a walk up my hill, both of us well protected against the stormy wind carrying horizontal gusts of rainfall. Being Irish, weather conditions were never an excuse not to go outside. Wellingtons and a Macintosh usually did the trick. Close to the top, we sat down on the hill's lee side, away from the wind, and shared cigarettes. I had recently tried a mentholated cigarette and decided they were going to be my choice, whereas Sir John stuck to his generation's unfiltered dark tobacco. Players, if I remember well. Once we had lit up, Sir John started talking. "Few people know what I do, but I want you to know. That is, if you can keep a secret." "Of course," I said quickly. "Good boy. I work for an organization which at this point I shall not give you the name of, but I do want you to know what we are about." His voice sounded even more serious than usual. "Our task is to understand society at large. We are not interested in the individual per se, rather in the way people group together and how they influence each other. Think of rock and roll music, which is now all the rage. Where did it come from? From a handful of musicians who decided to change their tune. Yes, but why and how did the new style become popular? It's just coincidence, many people will say, and they see this element of chance as a deciding factor in the excitement they feel about the new phenomenon. What luck to be alive in this day and age and to form part of man's evolving history. Well, we at the Institute do not believe in chance. We believe in influence. If rock and roll suddenly rises to prominence and captures the hearts of young people all over the world, then a concerted effort to make this happen has been playing out in the shadows. Being in its origins an American phenomenon, we have little to do with it. But that doesn't mean we are not alert at guiding this music finding its way into the hearts and minds of British youth. I know from the handful of times we have met that you have a natural interest in group interaction and that you have a talent for bringing people together." I chuckled, caught out. "That's true. I'm much like Mummy Darling in this way." "I'm probably better at it, which says a lot," Sir John affirmed. "This is why I thought you might be interested in my offer." He threw the butt of his cigarette in the wind. "Let me clarify some more. Most people work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, which makes up about a third of the time they are awake. The question is, how much does work influence a person's self-image? And if it does to a certain extent, do people who live in similar circumstances develop correspondent personalities? Are all physicians somewhat the same because they spend their days frothing over the health of their patients? Do all postmen have equal thoughts when they push through rain and wind? We joke over this in light conversation. We like using stereotypes to simplify our worldview. And we understand the truth cannot be what we claim it to be. That's all fine, it's just mind play. At the Institute, we take these possibilities seriously. Mind you, I'm not condemning that people align their perceptions. I don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable with the fact we are monitoring and managing their group behavior. We just want to offer effective solutions. Do you understand? I think so, I reacted, slightly overplaying my hand. But how do you go about it? How do you influence people? I felt I'd given my interruption just the right amount of emotion to be taken for concern. It's a long and detailed process, Sir John lectured. I will tell you one day, if you behave well. For now, I want to know if you would be interested in becoming our informer and influencer. Life in the 60s is going to be quite different from what we are used to. You got that spot on. We will need our outfield men among the public to deliver our messages and to retrieve information on people's reaction. As much as you love being on top of things and instigate the game, you also have the eyes and ears to let very little escape your attention. Sir John gave pause to think over his words. They sounded heartfelt enough for me to be likewise flattered and curious. Then what is it you want me to do? The earnest man studied me for a while, with me waiting for him to bestow upon me the role of a spy, savior of mankind. His answer, finally, couldn't be anything but disappointing. For the moment, just be yourself. Be in on things. What's going on? What might be the topic everybody is talking about next month? Of all the different styles of music we hear on the radio, which ones will we still be listening to come summer? Stick your nose in the wind and sniff out the future. That's funny, I said, composing myself. That is literally what I do when I'm up here. Since there is nothing to see here but nature and Lugala, I always feel I can see everything. It's the clairvoyant's eye, praised Sir John. When there's little to be seen, you suddenly see everything. Didn't Jesus wander off into the desert to learn what God's plan for him was? Oh, but he was on drugs, I reacted flippantly. That's why he understood. Do you think so? I heard somebody say so a few months ago. I'm not quite sure who, but I like the idea. And so do I, Sir John agreed. It's a great conception to spread about. Yet don't even bother remembering who said it. As I mentioned before, we're not interested in individuals. We're all about the group. Words are so much more important to us than the person who uttered them. I would definitely like to see a new vision of Jesus extend among the coming generations. Jesus the human, a man of flesh and blood, not the godlike creature who merely cloaked himself in an earthly body. It would, in a funny way, help the kids run out of the church. He seemed to be speaking to himself more than to me, and he cut himself off by wrestling another cigarette out of his packet. Well, those are just the musings of a sentimental mind, he continued. I believe it's time to go down and see if some of those wide-eyed pranksters have returned from the dead to share this wonderful start of the new decade with us. What do you say? I say fine, I said. The blow of not being sent off on adventure immediately could bother me for only a few seconds. Much stronger was the glorious feeling of trust Sir John was allotting me. Me, not yet 15, in the centre of things. First of all, not a word about this conversation to anyone. Never, ever. Is that clear? I shall be in contact with you every now and then to hear from you and feed you ideas to spread. Ideas which obviously have come up in your own head completely spontaneously, as such meetings will be between you and me and nobody else. Are you up to it? I jumped to my feet and looked around at that little patch of earth which so much belonged to me as I belonged to her, and beyond whose limits lay the rest of the planet, the new 1960s planet which I was going to help shape, if I had understood Sir John correctly. What will the main trends be? I asked when we had passed the steepest bit and were comfortably walking down towards our ever-lovely lodge, tucked away in the woods in all its modesty and eccentricity. You must have some idea of what is coming. We certainly do. Music and clothes will be big. They are the things that young people will be able to afford now that the economy is growing strongly. Cliff Richard is an early example of what we are up for. Cliff Richard? My cup of tea neither, laughed Sir John. But we can't throw it to the teens all at once, can we? It would merely scare them away. Cliff is the 1960s first baby steps. Larger strides will follow. There will also be inspired youths who pick up on the trend and create their own ideas, their own music and fashion. We need you to be aware of these and report them to us, so we can decide which styles are worth being supported and developed. You will not be paid for your services for as long as you haven't won control over your own finances. We can't have anyone trace our little business deal. I will see to it you are made whole once the time is right. Until then, you must take my word for it and accept timely expense reimbursements. Will that do? A gentleman's agreement, perfect, I said cheerfully. Good man, ruled Sir John, putting his hand on my shoulder. Now, let's bury this conversation deep in our brains and talk about something utterly superficial. How about a nice cup of tea and whatever the maid is willing to serve us?